The P-8A Poseidon had been on station for 4 hours and 19 minutes when the J-16 appeared. This is the detail that contextualizes everything that follows. Because 4 hours and 19 minutes over the South China Sea on a maritime surveillance mission is 4 hours and 19 minutes of the most systematic, patient, high-altitude data collection available from an airborne platform. Sensor arrays running, acoustic processors compiling, radar building its picture of the surface below, communication intercepts accumulating in the mission system's storage architecture. The P-8A is not a combat aircraft in the conventional sense. It is a flying signals intelligence and anti-submarine warfare platform built on a Boeing 737 airframe. Crewed by a mission team whose job is to observe, record, and transmit with the unhurried thoroughness of professionals who have all the sensors, all the bandwidth, and all the time the mission window allows. By the time the J-16 arrived, the P-8A had been thorough. The mission had launched from Kadena Air Base before dawn on a Tuesday in the South China Sea's operational calendar, one of the hundreds of similar missions that U.S. reconnaissance aviation has flown over international waters in this region every year for decades, in exercise of the same freedom of overflight that international law provides to every nation, and that the People's Republic of China contests through a combination of official diplomatic notes, academic legal arguments, and the periodic physical appearance of fighter aircraft. The crew had completed 2 of their 3 planned acoustic buoy runs, and had the surface picture in the operating area updated through the morning satellite pass cross-reference. The sensor operator at Station 4 had eaten a meal that the flight kitchen would have described as lunch, and which he would have described more accurately as a collection of packaging materials from which something edible had been recently removed. He had been watching his sonar processor display for 3 hours and 40 minutes with the focused, slightly meditative attention that long surveillance missions cultivate. Not boredom exactly, but a state of attention that is quieter and more economical than the sharp alertness of a combat approach. The specific professional condition of someone doing important work that mostly consists of watching for things that do not yet appear. The defensive systems operator, occupying the seat that monitors radar warning receivers and the aircraft's electronic support measures package, had been running a secondary task during the quiet phase of the mission, updating the threat library file for the operating area against the morning's new entries. A housekeeping function that surveillance missions accumulate the way ships accumulate barnacles, steadily and without drama. She had the library current to 947. The P-8A's AN/ALQ-240 electronic support measures system, the aircraft's dedicated electronic intelligence collection suite, had been passively monitoring the electromagnetic environment since takeoff, adding to the collection file, with the automatic diligence of a system that does not distinguish between important and unimportant signals until a human reviews the log and makes that determination. The log at 9:47 had 14 entries. By 11:23, it would have 19. At 11:04, the radar warning receiver produced its first alert of the mission. The alert tone was specific, not the broad frequency sweep of a surface search radar, not the navigational transponder returns that Chinese maritime traffic generates constantly below the flight altitude. The tone was the specific audio signature of an airborne fire control radar in search mode, bearing 270 range data resolving. The defensive systems operator looked up from her library update. She identified the emission in approximately 3 seconds against the threat library she had just finished updating. PL-12 mid-range air-to-air missile datalink, the specific frequency architecture that Chinese flanker variant aircraft use when their fire control radar is active in search mode. She noted the classification. She noted the bearing. She noted that the emission had appeared at a range that her receiver's signal strength analysis placed at approximately 45 miles, which meant the emitting aircraft had been closing from outside her receiver's detection range. She keyed the intercom. Pilot, defensive systems, airborne fire control radar, bearing 270, range estimate 45 miles, classification J-series, flanker variant, search mode, tracking. The pilot acknowledged with the tone of a senior officer who has been doing this long enough to treat a 45-mile fire control radar detection as information requiring attention rather than an event requiring alarm. He noted it. He noted the P-8A was in international airspace on a filed flight plan at 25,000 feet. He noted the J-16 had every legal right to be in this airspace, and that its fire control radar in search mode was aggressive but not legally hostile. He noted the nearest U.S. fighter support was approximately 40 minutes away. 40 minutes. The J-16 was 45 miles out and closing. Here is the specific shape of the vulnerability. Because this channel presents vulnerabilities honestly before explaining why they did not matter. The P-8A Poseidon is not designed to engage or evade a modern air superiority fighter. It is a 737, a very sophisticated, very capable, very heavily instrumented 737. But the fundamental aerodynamics of a 737 do not include the option of converting its 140-knot speed differential, relative to a J-16 and afterburner, into anything useful from a self-defense standpoint. What the P-8A has, in lieu of the performance envelope of a fighter aircraft, is the ALQ-240 ESM suite, a radar warning receiver, a set of communications links that reach a significant portion of Pacific Command at the press of a button, and cruiser now cruise. A legal and operational position so clearly established under international law that any physical interference with it generates a diplomatic incident of the first order within approximately 4 minutes. It also has, at the moment in question, no dedicated escort. The nearest dedicated fighter support was the 40 minutes away already mentioned. 40 minutes is the gap. It is a real gap. The J-16 was going to be here considerably before the gap closed. The J-16 is a capable aircraft. This channel states this without qualification and will not hedge it. The Shenyang J-16 is a twin-engine, twin-seat strike fighter derived from the Sukhoi Su-30 family, with Chinese-developed avionics that include an AESA radar, a sophisticated electronic warfare suite, and a weapons load that a serious air warfare planner takes seriously. Its pilots fly approximately 120 hours per year, fewer than US Navy strike fighter pilots, but enough to be proficient at the basic mechanics of an intercept. The J-16 arriving from the west at Mach 0.9 in afterburner was not something to dismiss. The humor in this story does not come from the J-16's capability. It comes from what the J-16's pilot was about to do with that capability, which was perform an intercept maneuver that the Chinese Ministry of National Defense would later describe as professional and safe, and that the P-8A's crew would describe in their subsequent report, using language that was professional, precise, and consistently more interesting than professional and safe. The J-16 achieved visual range at 1108. The defensive systems operator had been tracking its fire control radar since 1104, watching the mode transitions as the aircraft went from search to acquisition to track, the specific sequence that a fire control radar runs through when a pilot is building a targeting solution. Each mode transition logged with timestamp and frequency by the AN/ALQ-240 with the methodical patience of a system that never gets bored and never misses a pulse. The P-8A's pilot had declared the intercept contact on guard frequency at 1106, notifying the aircraft's presence in international airspace per standard intercept protocol. The J-16 had not responded on guard. This was noted. At 1109, the J-16 executed its first pass. The maneuver crossed the P-8A's nose at approximately 15 meters of lateral separation, at a closing speed that produced a relative velocity of approximately Mach 1.4. The J-16 was in partial afterburner, and the physics of two aircraft passing at that closure rate at 15 meters means that the P-8A passed through the J-16's jet wash with a jolt that the mission commander would later describe as significant, and that 3 members of the mission crew would describe, in individual conversations, that the incident report would aggregate anonymously, as things they would prefer not to experience again. At 15-meter separation, the sensor operator at Station 4 could read the J-16's tail markings without optical aid. He did. He noted them in his log because that is what surveillance crews do when someone flies close enough to be read. They read and they log, and the log becomes part of the record. The first pass lasted approximately 3 seconds from nose crossing to departure. The P-8A's flight data recorder captured the turbulence. The AN/ALQ-240 captured the fire control radar's mode state during the pass. It was in tracking mode. The defensive systems operator captured this fact with the specific professional calm of someone who has just logged something that will be in several briefing rooms before the day is over. The mission crew's audio recording, required by standing orders to run continuously during all flight operations, captured everything said in the cockpit during those 3 seconds. The cockpit audio record is a classified document, and its specific contents are not available for public discussion. But the general category of human response to a fighter aircraft passing 15 meters from your nose at Mach 1.4 in afterburner is probably not difficult to estimate. The pilot maintained the P-8A's heading and altitude. This is the most important sentence in this entire account, and it deserves to sit alone. The pilot of a surveillance aircraft that has just had a fighter pass its nose at 15 meters in international airspace, on a legal mission, with no escort and no defensive capability against a follow-on hostile act, maintained heading and altitude. He did not maneuver. He did not turn away. He did not divert from his filed route. He continued the mission because the mission was legal. His position in the airspace was legal, and altering course in response to an unsafe intercept would establish a precedent that his chain of command had considered, codified in standing orders, and rejected. He keyed the guard frequency and reported the intercept to Pacific Command Operations in the clipped, factual language of a pilot who is providing information rather than expressing a reaction. He had been flying P-8 missions for 7 years. He had been intercepted before. He was not going to change his heading because someone flew close. He pressed on, with the specific professional stubbornness that turns an unsafe intercept from an intimidation success into a documented incident. The J-16 made a second pass at 11:11. Lateral separation this time, approximately 25 meters. The AN/ALQ-240 logged the radar mode. The audio captured the cockpit. The tail markings were noted again. At 11:13, something happened that moved this encounter from the category of aggressive but familiar Chinese intercept behavior into a narrower category that the Pacific Command Incident Classification System reserved for events requiring flag-level review. The J-16 flew directly in front of the P-8A and executed a slow roll, a maneuver that, at the separation distance it was performed, required the P-8A's pilot to apply a corrective control input to avoid the wingtip turbulence generated by the rolling aircraft. A corrective control input on a 737 in international airspace to avoid the wingtip vortex of a fighter pilot, demonstrating that he could put his aircraft where he wanted and leave the consequences as a problem for the other crew. The maneuver was captured on the P-8A's external camera. The camera footage would be reviewed, analyzed, and described in the Pacific Command flag, brief as outside established norms for intercept operations, a phrase that, in military reporting language, is the equivalent of underlining something 3 times and adding 2 exclamation points. The mission commander had been composing the intercept report since 11:08. By 11:14, the report had become something considerably more detailed than the standard intercept notification. He was a thorough writer. The situation had provided thorough material. Now comes the intelligence picture, which is where this encounter becomes something the J-16 pilot's mission planners had not fully accounted for. The P-8A's AN/ALQ-240 Electronic Support Measures Suite had been collecting the J-16's emissions since the fire control radar first appeared at 11:04. Across the 31 minutes between initial detection and the J-16's eventual departure at 11:35, the collection had been comprehensive in the specific way that comprehensive means when a passive collection system is within visual range of its emitting target for an extended period in clear conditions. The J-16's Leopard AESA radar, the Chinese-developed active electronically scanned array that the PLA Air Force installed on the J-16 as part of its avionics upgrade program, had been operating in multiple modes throughout the intercept, and the AN/ALQ-240 had logged every mode, every frequency agility sequence, every scan rate, every power level transition. This was not an incidental benefit of the encounter. This was precisely the kind of close-range, extended duration, known geometry collection that the threat library specialists at Pacific Air Force's intelligence had been seeking on the Leopard AESA for 18 months, because close-range emission characterization is qualitatively different from long-range collection. At close range, the signal-to-noise ratio is high enough to characterize the radar's individual beam steering transitions, the specific timing patterns that reveal the radar's scan architecture, at a level of detail that no amount of long-range collection can replicate. The J-16 had spent 31 minutes demonstrating its fire control radar's complete operational profile to the most capable airborne electronic intelligence collection system in U.S. inventory, from a range that varied between 15 meters and 4 miles. Every mode transition during the 3 passes, search to acquisition, to track, and back, was logged. The datalink frequency architecture that the PL-12 missile uses to receive mid-course guidance from the J-16's radar was characterized from the emissions during the tracking mode intervals. This datalink characterization is tactically valuable in a specific way. Understanding the exact frequency architecture of a missile's mid-course guidance link is the first step toward developing a countermeasure that can interrupt that link. The J-16 pilot had been trying to intimidate a surveillance aircraft. The surveillance aircraft's defensive systems operator had been building the foundation of a future countermeasure to the J-16's primary air-to-air weapon. The external camera footage, the recording of the slow roll at close separation, had captured something additionally useful. A clear view of the J-16's underside during the roll, showing the weapons load configuration. 2 PL-15 extended-range air-to-air missiles on the inboard pylons, 2 PL-12 mid-range missiles on the mid-span pylons, the electronic warfare pod on the centerline station. A specific weapons configuration, documented, photographed, confirmed. Combined with the radar characterization and the datalink frequency data, the afternoon's collection package represented a complete operational snapshot of a J-16 in its air superiority configured state. Weapons loaded, radar active, datalink operating. Provided free of charge by the aircraft that had come to intimidate the platform collecting it. The defensive systems operator transmitted the initial collection summary to Pacific Air Force's intelligence at 11:41, 6 minutes after the J-16 departed. The Pacific Air Force's intelligence duty officer who received the transmission read the Leopard AESA characterization section twice before continuing. He then called his section chief. The section chief read the Leopard AESA section. He said something that the duty officer would later describe as a compliment to the crew and a critique of the J-16 pilot's decision-making. Both assessments were accurate. The money picture here operates on a different axis than most of this channel's cost analyses, because the J-16 is not cheap hardware, and the P-8A is not cheap either. And the exchange that occurred was not primarily about munitions or operational overhead. It was about information, AJ-16 sortie, fuel, weapons certified for the loadout, pilot operational costs, base support overhead for a 2-hour mission in the South China Sea, runs to approximately $85,000 to $120,000 in direct operational cost. The mission objective, as the Chinese military planning process would have specified it, demonstrate PLA Air Force presence, assert sovereign airspace claims, signal resolve, generate footage for documentation of the intercept, and, if doctrine was followed, collect whatever the J-16's own electronic systems could gather on the P-8A during the close-range passes. The J-16's EW suite is capable. It was presumably collecting. The P-8A's AN/ALQ-240 at the ranges involved was collecting at a signal quality that made the J-16's return collection look like reading a newspaper headline from across the room while the other side was reading your email. The P-8A's mission operating cost for the day: 12 hours of flight operations, crew costs, support overhead. The Kadena base throughput runs to approximately $350,000. The intelligence value of the Leopard AESA characterization package, the PL-15 and PL-12 datalink frequency data, and the weapons configuration photography, assessed in the Pacific Air Force's quarterly review at approximately $6.2 million in collection cost equivalents. This is what it would cost to achieve comparable Leopard AESA characterization through dedicated collection missions, requiring the specific close-range, extended duration geometry that the J-16's intercept behavior had produced involuntarily. The J-16's pilot had provided $6 million in intelligence value to the platform he had been tasked to intimidate, and he had done so by flying close enough to read his own tail number. The friction in this operation was the ROE wall, the layer of restraint that prevented the P-8A from responding to the unsafe intercept with anything other than documentation and a guard frequency transmission. There was no kinetic option available, no escalatory response authorized, no defensive maneuver that the standing orders permitted without meeting a threshold. The J-16 had not technically crossed, despite everything it had done. The pilot's only tools were his heading, his altitude, his communications link, and his crew's cameras and collection suites. He used all of them. Maintaining heading in international airspace when a fighter passes 15 meters from your nose is not the passive choice. It appears from the outside. It is a deliberate exercise of legal position that costs something real in the human experience of the cockpit and produces something real in the diplomatic and intelligence record. Both costs were paid. Both products were delivered. The P-8A recovered at Kadena at 13:58. The mission crew debriefed for 2 hours and 22 minutes. The debrief covered the intercept timeline, the radar mode sequence, the weapons configuration documentation, the slow roll maneuver, and its flight data recorder trace, and, in a section that ran longer than any other, the Leopard AESA characterization results. The defensive systems operator presented her collection summary to the intelligence officer with the specific, unhurried thoroughness of someone who has prepared a detailed product and intends it to be understood correctly. The intelligence officer took notes. He asked 3 clarifying questions. She answered all 3 with the kind of precision that comes from having watched a radar system's every emission for 31 minutes at ranges where the signal strength was high enough to characterize individual beam steering transitions. The intelligence officer described the characterization package to his section chief as exceptional. The section chief, who had 23 years in signals intelligence analysis, read the Leopard AESA section and used a different word, one that suggested he was impressed and also slightly frustrated that it had taken an unsafe intercept to generate the collection geometry that produced it. The mission commander filed the incident report at 17:15. 14 pages, camera footage, and flight data recorder appendices included, classified above standard debrief level and distributed to Pacific Air Forces, Pacific Command, the Joint Chiefs, and the State Department. Unsafe intercepts in international airspace generate simultaneous military and diplomatic responses, 2 tracks toward the same station at different speeds. The military channel arrived immediately. The diplomatic channel would arrive in 48 hours with a formal protest note, and Beijing's response characterizing the J-16 as lawful, professional, and entirely within normal parameters. The sovereign interest claim deserves a plain statement. Beijing's position, filed in diplomatic notes, taught in PLA Air Force doctrine, enforced through regular intercepts, is that airspace above Chinese-claimed South China Sea waters is subject to Chinese jurisdiction, and that foreign military aircraft operating there without permission are illegal provocations. The U.S. position, backed by UNCLOS and every major maritime nation, is that international airspace is international airspace, and surveillance operations above it are legal, regardless of what is below. These positions have been in direct conflict for years, generating regular intercepts, regular incident reports, and regular diplomatic exchanges that produce no resolution. The P-8A's crew knew this. They flew the mission anyway, because freedom of overflight requires continued exercise. Rights that are never exercised become concessions. Chinese state media published its version of the day's events at 1930. The piece described a PLA Air Force patrol in the South China Sea that had identified and professionally tracked a U.S. military reconnaissance aircraft conducting illegal surveillance activities in the Chinese sovereign airspace. The piece noted that the PLA Air Force had acted in accordance with applicable laws and regulations to protect Chinese national sovereignty. A military spokesperson elaborated at a press briefing. The intercept had been conducted professionally. The U.S. aircraft had been operating illegally. and China reserved the right to respond to future provocations as appropriate. The word professional appeared in the official statement 4 times. The phrase lawful and necessary measures appeared twice. The slow roll was not mentioned. The 15-meter pass was not mentioned. The flight data recorder trace showing the P-8A's corrective input was not mentioned. The Leopard AESA characterization data going into the Pacific Air Force's threat library was emphatically not mentioned. What Beijing's press office did not know, because no instrument aboard the J-16 was capable of detecting it, and because the collection was passive and silent throughout, was that the flight the spokesperson was describing as a professional lawful patrol had spent 31 minutes providing the United States with the most detailed operational characterization of the J-16's primary fire control radar that Pacific Air Force's intelligence had collected in the current program year. Spokesperson used the word professional 4 times. The Leopard AESA characterization package used frequencies, mode sequences, and beam steering transition timings that the intelligence community would take considerable time to fully exploit. Both products existed. One was a press release. The other was filed in a database that will be current and actionable long after the press release has been archived. Which one matters more depends on what you are trying to accomplish. And what the P-8A crew was trying to accomplish was not a press cycle. It was a mission. They completed it. They documented it. They recovered at Kadena. They went to get food that was, by any objective standard, better than what the galley provides at sea, which is the specific modest reward available to aircrew who are based on land. They ate it. The mission log was filed. The threat library was updated by Thursday morning. The next P-8A mission launched on schedule on Wednesday. The airspace is still international. The missions continue. The collection continues. The intercepts continue. The library grows. Somewhere in the Pacific Air Force's intelligence building, the Leopard AESA file is now thicker than it was on Monday, and the J-16 that made it thicker is back in its revetment, ready for the next patrol, with no instrument on board that measures what it gave away. Bye for now.